Hello everybody and welcome to BCS Chester and North Wales. We finished our AGM a little early, so we just wrapped up. The talk that we have ahead of us, I'm sure, which is the main feature, why everybody's joined us, is all around building trustworthy AI, and certainly something I've been looking forward to hearing a lot about. So as the title suggests, it's from an SME's perspective. And we're very lucky to have our SME with us tonight, Professor Keely Crockett. Keely is a professor in computational intelligence in the Department of Computing and Maths at MMU. And I'm sure she will do a much better job of introducing herself than I will. But her list of accolades and research topics and everything, I'm sure will be proof enough that she is the SME that we're all hoping to hear from. Just a couple of bits in terms of housekeeping. So we would love for you to ask questions. Please do. There's the questions on the right hand side. And what we will do is we'll collect them up until the end. And then we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end. So we've got about 40 minutes and then some questions at the end. So I'd like to hand over Keely.
Hi there, everybody, and thank you so much to Stuart and the branch for inviting me to give this little talk tonight. What can I say? You've done me a really good introduction there. I probably have too many slides, so I may skip a few to make sure we're on target, but I really hope you enjoy talking about engaging with this really important topic. So, as we know, the ethical, social and legal landscape of AI-driven systems is rapidly changing. And this all really started with the General Data Protection Regulation in 2018, when stakeholders started to face numerous challenges in the interpretation of something called the Article 22, which we'll talk more about later. But it started to get businesses, even academics, to think about an individual's rights in the context of automated decision making. The ability of AI to try and explain decisions, the logic involved, and for us to develop models which are deemed correct in inverted commas. So this has caused a lot of challenges due to the lack of legal guidelines, millions of guidelines, case law, etc. And especially for SMEs, it's really a greater challenge because they don't have the specific skills, budget or human resources. So by SME, I mean small to medium enterprises. Usually the definition is 250 less employees. And what I'm also interested in is micro businesses, those startups that have 10 or less employees. So during the talk, I'm going to explain why ethical processes are simply not enough, and I'll share with you a little story. We'll look at the dynamic landscape, and I'll tell you about some of the work we're doing on place-based ethical AI in Greater Manchester. And then I'll share a couple of the work we've been doing since the lockdown, actually, working with SMEs and local authorities, and working with government as well on some of that work. So that's my brief overview. So then, I've been working in developing both from a research and a development perspective on theoretical and applied AI for over 23 years. And my main area originally was fuzzy systems development and optimization. And of course, you tend to move into all the other areas as well. And in 2016 to December 2019, I was involved in a very large European project called Border Control. So it was 4.5 million euros, 13 partners across 9 countries. There were 2 universities involved, MMU, and there was also a German university, legal team and lawyers, okay? And the idea of this project was to provide a unified solution in a 2-stage procedure for speeding up land border crossings at Schengen borders across Central Europe, but at the same time making sure we enhance the security by using state-of-the-art technology. And what you can see in this little diagram is that there was applications for travellers, and there was also an application for border guards. So when a person was going through a first-line check, often in the case of Schengen borders, people may be on foot, or they're in a car, or in a bus, a van, or train, or anything like that, they would be asked a series of questions. And what our system did, incorporated with many other features such as face matching, which was not by MMU, that was Spanish Air Defense, but we did something called an automated deception detection system. So we're essentially profiling people from their non-verbal facial behaviour. And all this information was accumulated together to give border guards additional information. And the risk to a person was simply, if that information indicated you were a higher risk, then you went to a second line check. This procedure already happens. But you know what? It caused massive uproar. In October 18, the European Commission published a story about border control to coincide with a showcase event because the system was going really well. And at Manchester Science Festival at Mosey, we were able to provide a demonstration of that system, and under informed consent, members of the public could take part and have a go and give us their feedback on like the usability and the design of that system. The media got hold of this, and to say we went viral was an understatement. From the Daily Mail, 31.5 million views, New Scientist, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, all over the world, people were talking about a system that was profiling people. Now, in terms of the project in the European Commission, this project had an independent European Commission ethical advisor. We reported to an ethics board in the EU. We also had a work package dedicated ethics where we had to do quarterly reports on the ethics status. We completed data privacy impact assessments per partner, and also we had legal advisors for data controller and data processor relationships. Everything was done correctly, yet still it caused a massive uproar. And in fact, there is still a court case going through the EU, even though this system will never ever be used in practice. So all this process exposed me to ethics, both AI related and data ethics. And I can say that currently, at that time, in 2018, all those procedures, everything in the GDPR was followed, but it was not enough, okay, to build trust. So when we look at AI ethics, I take the standard government definition that you can see there, values, principles, and techniques that guide our moral conduct. Sounds fantastic. But every time we have new technology, we have new ethical problems. And the question is, should a device, a technique or technology be restricted because people can use it for illegal or harmful actions as well as beneficial ones? So over the past few years, the policy and impact landscape of ethics has been changing dramatically. There are literally hundreds of regulations, standards, frameworks, guidelines and principles from the United Nations to Unicode to the US to New Zealand, Taiwan. Everybody has a statement about ethical principles, but they're very, very quite fragmented. And all it takes is one item in the press to really, really discredit the use of AI. And we can see that from the A-level algorithms that were released last year. And what we found is that all these things exist, legislation has not caught up yet, and there is a gap between having a principle and practically applying it within a business. If you are a big player, IBM, Microsoft, you have enough people to have a department to deal with all this. But unfortunately, where does that leave the SME? So I just wanted to share with you here a summary of key principles that you can see, and this is basically from an analysis of quite a few hundreds of documents, and I'm not going to read through them all now. I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with some of them. Incidentally, AI systems should be sustainable is an AI exclusive, really. It was the only one at the time 14 months ago that actually looked at sustainability of AI. I just thought I'd highlight that one. So if we look at the UK on this journey and where are we, then the UK AI Council published in January 21 an independent roadmap, and it called upon a national AI strategy was needed and needed to be prioritised by the government with a time frame to enable the UK to position itself. And incidentally, it also focused on two key areas. skills and diversity, the need to scale up businesses, but also to scale up the public. And that is really, really important, because if you want the public to be involved in trusting AI, they've got to have the knowledge to be able to ask questions about decisions made by such systems. They need to feel quite empowered. So the recommendations of this roadmap, skills and diversity and building public trust, were really, really key. And this roadmap basically said the UK will only get the full benefits if all parts of society have confidence in the science and the technologies. So on this little journey, in March 21, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport highlighted their top 10 tech priorities. And again, I want just to build the theme here that what they wanted was the idea that data is an economy. We want to look at data sharing, but how do we do that ethically and in what kinds of systems? And as part of that priority, we want to build this tech-savvy United Kingdom. We want every adult to have a base level of digital and cyber skills, so no one is left behind. So think about that. And this is where I'd like to bring in this Article 22. So I need to introduce this concept. Article 22 applies to automated individual decision making and profiling. It has rules that protects individuals against solely automated decision making that has, quote, a legal or similar significant effect on them. So we first started to unpick this in 2018 with our German legal team, okay, on the I-Border Control project. What is automated processing? Is it sufficient for a system that screens applications online for a loan? Is that fully automated or not? In terms of it just gives them a first step. Yes, you may go forward, okay, but what is the level of automation? What is legal or similar significant effect on a person? We're coming back to defining what is harm. And what happens if an automated decision system outcome is passed to a human? So we have this human in the loop system here, where they have been given information that's been accumulated into a decision, and they have to use their expertise to interpret it. What happens if they don't really understand, or maybe they become lapse and just take the decision of the machine? So there's a lot of issues here that we need to take into consideration when building trustworthy tech. So I'm still on this little journey with you at the moment. And in April 21, you probably also know that the EU published its new regulation framework for AI. And this framework adopts a risk-based approach. The framework, as it says, is for both public and private sectors, both inside and outside the EU. So obviously in terms of trade and system development, it is likely to impact globally. It relies on the actors assessing the risk of their own AI products and services, and it defines 4 categories. At the top is things like unacceptable risk. So this is a very limited set of harmful uses of AI that the EU contravenes. They violate human rights or fundamental human rights. So an example of this is China's social credit scoring system. We then go down into the high risk category, and this includes things like critical infrastructures, such as transport, that could put life and health of citizens at risk. So anything to do with self-driving vehicles. You can also see on the screen here that it actually includes border control management. Yes, we managed to find our way into the high risk category, okay? But it includes AI in assisted surgeries, any form of credit scoring system, such as citizens applying for a loan, is also considered high risk, and it goes on. Anything in high risk, you would have to provide a full risk mitigation strategy to be able to deal with it, including providing documentation into a centralized EU database, logging activity, making sure your AI was explainable, and appropriate human oversight was given. Limited looks at categories such as chatbots, where it's important for the human to know they're communicating with an agent rather than a real person. And at the bottom end, we've got things like video games. So we can see this shift is happening. The risk-based approach is coming on quite strong. One of the problems while they were developing this framework, of course, is how do we differentiate between low and high risk? And on the screen at the moment is a little extract of this, okay, about some of the arguments that took place. Where is the line? What makes a system low or high risk? It could be the same application, but in a different domain, okay? And there's still quite a lot of debate about this. So as we know, this regulation has not been passed yet because they're still ironing out some of these issues. So you're probably aware that September was a busy month. The UK's National AI Strategy was released, okay? And this builds on the UK's strengths, but also represents the start of a step change for the use of AI in the UK, recognising that the power of AI should be used to increase resilience, productivity, growth and innovation across both private and public sectors. So some really interesting words in this strategy. The UK is going to be an AI superpower. It's going to benefit all sectors and regions, so there will be targeted funding towards certain areas. And this is really interesting, national and international governance of AI technologies. The government basically gets it right. So how will this be achieved? The strategy says that this will be achieved through broad public trust and support and by involving diverse talents and views of society. So this now encourages us to use more public juries, more citizen involvement when we develop our AI. So let me talk a little bit about risks in developing such systems. And I always use this example. So I'm a migraine sufferer and I tend to have medication from the GP, but I also use these ibuprofen with lipsinin from Morrison's. A lot of us on this call will have actually used off-the-shelf medication in our lives, and as you may know, you get a little piece of paper in there which tells us the risk of taking that medication. When I normally ask people this in interaction, most people say they haven't read it, some people do. But what it means is that with this tablet here, it says that 1 in 10,000 people may have stomach ulcers, 1 in 1,000 may have discomfort or diarrhea. Sorry to say it, but it's true. And when you go down to the bottom, okay, you could actually have a heart attack. But what we do is we accept the risk, right? We're given information, we accept the risk, and we take the tablets, okay? Is it not the same with AI, that if we were provided with the information that was appropriate to us, we would maybe accept the risk of the automated loan or mortgage system when we engage with the system? So here's an interesting one for you. AI-assisted HR recruitment tools, okay? These systems do actually exist. And what they do is they assist with job vacancies, and they look at traits in the application forms and automatically do a screening process to see which candidates you would interview or not, designed to take the load off shortlisting. So if you were given a data set with 6,000 historical records that were collected, say, over a period of 5 to 10 years, and I will note that the recruitment procedure has changed, and you have a data set that's made up of 1,500 females, 4,000 males, and 5,000 not disclosed, you know, what is the risk to the candidate of using such a system, and what is the risk to the company? And there are many issues just by looking at this, such as data representation when building the AI model, the process of recruitment changing, and also the human bias in labeling those records as interview or not interview. So candidates may be unfairly not included. Protected characteristics such as gender may be used to inform a decision. And bias, both from humans and labeling of data, may also feed its way into the process. And as AI systems learn from data which may be unbalanced and reflect discrimination, this is then echoed in the model. So there are many risk factors associated with developing AI that appear throughout the AI lifecycle, and we could probably spend hours talking about each individual one on this slide. So I'll just highlight a couple. Let's take bias. Everybody seems to know about data bias, but what about bias that's embedded into organizational or industrial cultures, personal bias, or even unconscious bias? Let's take explainable decisions. This is an area I'm really passionate on, and notice it's separated from explainable AI. And the reason is that if we're going to communicate and build trust with the public, we have to be able to explain to them in a language they understand how that decision was actually made. And we need to actually capture the fact that some people may have a low educational attainment. So I'm quite passionate about that area. But whichever one of these you look at on the slide here, what we need to do is balance the case between the rights and needs of individuals in terms of protecting them versus the needs of society overall. And it is a very, very difficult act to do. AI ethics need to be examined from many different dimensions, and at the end of the day, AI or the people who implement it has to be held accountable. Responsibility and accountability is a big area in AI in general, especially in automated decision making. Responsibility dimensions include social aspects, legal, ethical, moral, historical, and also business aspects. And there are many, many different factors of influence. We have public scrutiny, which is needed to build trust. We have legal frameworks that are coming on board, such as whether the EU framework will be adopted by the UK or not. I suspect not from the conversations I've been involved in. But then there's also audit compliance. Who's checking all this? Who's checking that people actually comply with legislation once we have it? And at the bottom, we've got all the work of the AI Council and the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, that parliamentary scrutiny. So at the end of the day, when we look at this particular pyramid that's on here, at the top is the impact explosion. If we do nothing and we carry on as is, then this is what's going to happen. We're going to get a lot of AI out there that maybe shouldn't have been developed. We're going to get bad press and things are going to go wrong. If we look at the bottom of the period, then we need to educate and train both the users and the people who are using the decisions from the AI and human in the loop. We've got to look across a number of different dimensions about responsibility and accountability, and we have to be very, very transparent about our decision making. And if we do all this, then we should increase the trust of the public. Okay, so I'm still going strong. I hope you're all okay. And what I'm going to do now is highlight some of the work we've done on place-based ethical AI with a focus on Greater Manchester. So over the past 5 years, I've really loved doing public engagement, and I've done events at Mosey. Stuart's also been involved in some of those events. We've done platforms for investigation. I've been on a public jury looking about whether AI is guilty or not. Now that was really exciting with lots of citizens. And I've also worked with, I dare say, IEEE on a number of different initiatives. But what we wanted to do was actually get involved into SMEs. And sometimes I think research is great, but actually you've got to get down there and speak to the citizens and speak to the businesses and see what they want and try and work with that problem instead of inventing all the latest tech. So I think that's another important dimension. So what did we do? First bit of work we did was quite interesting. We held 2 roundtables with the all-party parliamentary group on data analytics last year, June and July 2020. Now, why did we do this? Okay, we wanted to talk about data and public engagement. How could the public be better engaged around the ethical data usage of AI? What were the current challenges and shortcomings with ethical guidelines? How can organisations, public and private sector, particularly in procurement, from small SMEs to government, how could they actually work together? And what's a data-driven city? What does it actually look like from an ethical perspective? So the first roundtable we did, we tried to explore all these issues, and we had representations from Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Manchester Digital, Open Data, the BBC. Also had local representation from IBM, Deloitte, the CDI, etc., and a range of SMEs. And what was really interesting is we went in there thinking, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to talk about ethical AI. And actually, we found that it was very, very clear from these roundtables that it was data and not AI, and the issues around data had to be resolved before the ethical AI aspect could even be considered. Yet we assumed they'd moved on. So that was one of the things we learned. We then went to a second roundtable, which was at national level. We did get government involvement in this, HMRC, again, usual list of people, British Standards Institute, etc. And we started to talk about, okay, if we want to do this place-based ethical AI and data, how can Parliament and government work together to develop these local data strategies that were ethical? And how did this fit towards strategy? So to cut a long story short, we then had a series of interviews with policymakers and businesses. And the result of this was a parliamentary inquiry report, which is available, and it was called Our Place, Our Data, involving local people in data and AI-based recovery. So it was quite good because we started to try and push the agenda of citizen trust and how important it was to have citizens involved in the AI life cycle from start to finish. Now, what this report did was had 5 recommendations. And because I've got so much to say, as usual, I am not going to go through these recommendations in any detail. If anybody's interested, please download the inquiry report. It's obviously there and available. But the key messages were that we need to have citizens' involvement. They need to be involved not only in public sector, but also private sector uses of AI. There was also a requirement to ensure that we always looked at the harmful human rights issues when using AI, and all citizens should be educated enough to be able to understand and receive an explanation of any AI systems that we used. So as I said, I'm just going to skip over these recommendations very briefly and move on to one of the second pieces of work we did that inspired all this work with SMEs. So our second avenue for capturing perspectives came from the relationships on that particular inquiry. In May 2020, the Information Commissioner's Office worked with the Alan Turing Institute to produce some guidance called Explaining Decisions Made with AI. And the guidance was drafted in response to 2 reports. There was an independent review on AI in 2017 and the government AI sector deal in 2018. And the ICO were looking to assess the impact of this guidance. And so far, when we actually got in touch with them and we were speaking, they had only tried it with corporates and legal firms. They hadn't even considered going out to SMEs and saying, is this guidance actually useful to you? So this particular guidance introduced 2 kinds of explanation for businesses to use. There was a process explanation, which was all about AI systems demonstrating that the company had good governance processes and best practices on the design and use of AI, so they could explain how the decision was made. And then there was outcome-based explanations, which were about clarifying the results of a specific decision to a specific individual. And the guidance introduced 6 different kinds of explanation types, which is what you can see on here. Responsibility, who is responsible for the system and its decisions. How the algorithm made a recommendation, which was rationale, explanation. The data one is about what data was used in general and what data about me. Fairness, whether a person was being treated the same as other people, like themselves. Safety and performance was all about accuracy. And impact was about the impact of the decision on them as an individual and the wider impact of the use of AI on society. And after defining these explanation types, the guidance suggested a series of tasks for extracting and delivering explanations. So if you're in a business and you want to do this, what other steps will be involved? And it was not a rigid process. You could do them concurrently or in different orders, but it was designed to raise issues that companies may face when this became a legal requirement. A snapshot of that process is available on the slide at this moment in time. So what did we do, okay, with this? We did some workshops. We worked together with the Turing Institute and the ICO, and we developed a work booklet which would provide 2 different case studies to businesses to work through and see how the guidance actually worked. So we did it as a research project, but the impact was directly on the SMEs and local authorities in the Greater Manchester area. And all we wanted to do was look at the usability to capture the opinions of organisations and businesses on this guidance. We did a series of, obviously, research questions. What was the level of understanding of organisations on the legal basis currently of explaining AI? So we're looking at like the GDPR and the Article 22. We wanted to look at the effectiveness of this particular guidance and how well they understood the different explanations. We also wanted to know how much organisations place on ethical knowledge and skills of employees, and where did they want specialist training or CPD, and how could that be delivered. So we did these 2 workshops. We engaged in over 40 different entities, and you can see here some of the findings. The guidance is 100 pages. It comprises of quite a lot of checkbox as well as quite detailed tech. Okay, people weren't sure it was that long that people said they wouldn't really have the time and resources to be able to read it, understand it, and apply it within their businesses. There was also an issue about responsibility and trust, because remember, this guidance was very specific on explanation. It didn't really go into who is responsible for doing it within an organisation. There was also a big discussion about explanation on IP. You know, if we tell people how the decision is made or we explain the model in line with the GDPR, then are we giving our IPR away? Issues on bias were raised, and also what were the barriers for adoption for SMEs. So we can see here, for example, resources is a big problem, skills and training, understanding the different roles and who is responsible in a small business. And you know what some people said? They said, well, there's no audit and compliance now, so who's going to check and why do we have to do it? Okay, so quite a lot of interesting findings. The other thing I'd like to say about, so our 3rd little area that I can share with you is the Greater Manchester AI Foundry. This is seen as a technology accelerator. This is a ERDF European funded project across 3 years, led by Manchester Met, but also includes Lancaster, Manchester and Salford. And the idea here is we reach out to SMEs. We are going to look at helping over 170 SMEs create new 30 products and services over the next 3 years. And the SMEs come in and first do a series of business intervention workshops, including, as you can see here, a workshop on data privacy and ethical AI. And what they do, they go through the workshop and then they can go through to a 2nd stage technical assist. And the idea is that the research in the universities goes direct into the companies to help them solve their particular AI problems. Okay, so the idea is we try and build in ethics straight away. Instead of saying, oh, look, here's a guideline, go and read it. We try and work with SMEs in order to incorporate it into their business plans. I'm going to, because I've got a few things to say, I'm just going to skip a couple of slides there, so forgive me. And I want to jump to SME barriers and challenges. So through those 3 projects and probably another dozen, we get these following questions from SMEs or comments. So people say that it's not a legal requirement, but we argue and promote that being ethical now and thinking about the consequences for your system helps you be ahead of the curve when that legislation comes in, and it is definitely coming. In terms of skills, a lot of people require that training, and it's very interesting that AI startups really are in this category in terms of ethical usage of data and how to apply ethics within the life cycle. Generally, businesses felt that we spoke to wanted to be educated about the process before bringing in the public. There was also a good conversation about the language of explainability for different stakeholders. So I said, if you're over 65 and have had less exposure to tech, but you're using a system to say, apply for a loan, you've got the right to be able to understand the decision that's being made. And we also compare that to people with low educational qualifications, those in marginalised communities. We need to reach out to everybody. Legislation was a minefield. It's really interesting that from the businesses we spoke to, probably 85% didn't know about Article 22 and profiling, yet we're actually doing profiling with their data. So that's kind of interesting. And we've also got responsibility and accountability as well, okay? Who is responsible in your business? If you're a large corporate, as I said, you've got a team, it's more clear. But you know, who is it? Is it the chief technical officer, maybe, even if you've got a small business, who gets data from a client but doesn't really know about data science? Is it the data science team who actually build the model and report back saying this data actually isn't representative, but the CTO says, well, actually, that's all we've got. So it's like, where is that responsibility? You know, everybody has a role to play. So we found that there were many decisions regarding decision making using AI and the legal obligations that a company may actually have. But there are certain issues which also require input and solutions from the technical community. And from starting working on that Horizon 2020 border control project, right, it really outlined to me that the technical community need to be more familiar with the law in relation to AI decision making, that we had to work with the legal community as technical people, and the fact that on both sides the language was very, very different, and we need to be upskilled in the legal side and the lawyers need to be upskilled in the tech. Some of the challenges that we identified, again, this was a paper that we did with some of the lawyers from Germany, was about how do we assess the legal situation and apply safeguards? How do we explain our algorithm or model without leaking trade secrets, right? How can we explain these to a wide variety of audiences? Can the algorithm actually understand itself, how it made the decision? And how often should an algorithm or a model be updated? Okay, big questions. I'm skipping another slide. I am conscious of going for time, you see. So, a snapshot of toolkit. So over the summer, me and a few colleagues got together and we were hearing all these voices from SMEs, and they said, well, what's out there? What's free? What can we use? And we found out that all these SMEs were on a different journey in terms of understanding data and AI ethics in the AI lifecycle overall. So what we did, we started off with over 800 toolkits that were freely available that had some element of ethics in them from a data or AI perspective. And we developed 33 criteria, and we spent a lot of time and were able to go through and rank with a team of experts 77 of these toolkits. And this is important because hopefully we're under minor corrections, this will be published, and we're also developing a free tool to go online which will allow SMEs to look at their business readiness levels, AI journey, skills and resources, slide it along and get a tool recommended for them. Of course, the key element here is that it's free. Cool. So, please don't shoot me, but I'm quite involved a lot in IEEE work. I chair the International Task Force on Social and Ethical Implications of Computational Intelligence, which is a subset of AI. And IEEE do a lot of work in standards and they develop and publish them. So recently, 2 weeks ago, they published their latest AI ethics standard. The problem and bugbear I have is that you have to pay for a standard. And again, that sometimes is out of the remit for a small business. They do have some free offerings. The ones that are more recent though are, for example, the AI ethics readiness framework for businesses. So it looks at how businesses can utilize ethics and build sustainable AI, which is welcome. But it also talks about skills required for staff, what you should look for, what you should train your staff in to develop more trustworthy AI. There's also the ethically aligned design document, okay, which looks at frameworks for developing certain aspects of AI, from automated decision making to the use of drones. etc. The whole list of things and recommendations. So there are some things that are actually free and available for businesses to use. Within the machine learning community, currently there's no standardized process for documenting the data sets that are used. And of course, this can lead to severe consequences in high stake domains. So data sheets for data sets is another tool that's been proposed by Google and Microsoft to try and address this problem. And what we're trying to do here is to increase data set transparency and facilitate better communication between the people who create the data and the consumers. And it's great. The only problem here is the consumers are the data scientists who actually use the data to build the models. But again, it's a step in the right direction. And the last one I will highlight in terms of tools is one that's actually been developed by Microsoft as part of their Responsible Innovation Best Practices Toolkit. And I highlight this one because this one really does bring in the citizens' involvement. The judgment call is a game. It's a team-based activity that uses the principles of fairness, privacy, reliability, safety, transparency, etc. And it's a game where stakeholders, so we've got the citizen involvement there, do scenario imagineering. So they're looking at the consequences of this new AI product and service and the impact it has on them and society as a whole. Harms modelling has been developed simply for the development team, okay, to look at, again, what the impact of the technology will be on a variety of different aspects, from what happens if the data is not right and not representative, to what happens in terms of human rights and does it infringe on them. And lastly, I love this idea. Alan Turing Institute also use this, but it's quite expensive. It's the community jury. So this is where you pitch your idea to citizens as a business and get their feedback, okay? And this is where I think you get a lot of richness, because you actually get communities, if you go out there, telling you what they really want, not what some academic, and I am an academic, in a lab has thought of being the next great thing, when actually the people in the community want AI to be used for something else to benefit them. So I really love this idea. And lastly, I've got to mention the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. What they have done is they've now included advice for small businesses. So you can go on there and you can ask them about your data and AI needs and what you're doing and whether or not you need to do anything special like safeguarding. But there is a disclaimer on this site to actually say that this is a starting point and it doesn't guarantee absolute compliance with the GDPR. But it's still very, very useful, and we often signpost SMEs to this particular area. So, I'm going fast now, and I will try and finish within 5 minutes or less. Greater Manchester Ethical AI Working Group is something we set up in October 2020, and we wanted people to talk about this. We wanted to get people involved. So we've got the combined authority, again, BBC, Manchester Digital, and some SMEs together with other partners. And what we're trying to do is make Greater Manchester really, really important in terms for data and innovation, but do it in a trustworthy and ethically way. So we have a series of work streams that we're working on, and we're trying to bring people together. It all starts with talking, but then actually applying best practice. So I'm working with some SMEs on some tools, and we're trying it out, okay? We're just seeing, does it work? Is it no good? How can we actually improve it? We're also working with the Greater Manchester Tech Collective. Stuart is also involved in this responsible tech diagnostic tool. He's took part in some usability sessions, but we're also now one of the founding members for the new GM Tech Collective. So Stuart didn't know that yet, but we are. So we're trying to shape that and how we can be more involved. We're also running large surveys, they're kind of longitudinal. We're trying to capture public opinions, and we're also working with SMEs to try and capture more about what they want. Okay, so we have them going on. Academic underpinning. I suppose I'm an academic, really. I am an academic, right? But we are publishing, and I think that's the message. One of the key things for me, always publishing tech stuff, So it's very, very technical, is trying to get the technical community to actually understand that ethics is important as well for academics as well as businesses. So we're very, very lucky, pushed, and we've got a special issue in IEEE transactions on AI. But again, we managed to get someone from IBM to join us on that issue, and also someone representing the Australian government as well. So it was kind of really a push, but it got accepted, so that'll be out next year. We're working with some of the work with the Turing Institute. So again, we've just completed our first draft of a journal, so that's going to go out there, which is look at social elements of explaining AI with SMEs. And I'm involved in lots and lots of different panels which I've organised. So I'm always looking for great speakers who are really, really passionate. So if anyone's interested, contact me. No pitch intended. Wow, I've been working with AI Tech North as well on public intelligence. So who owns your individual intelligence? And this again was another project looking at people-driven principles, how to build accountable design. So this was coming at a slightly different angle. But again, we've had, I've been quite lucky to work with some of these people, including one of the heads of programs from the United Nations on this, to try and again, look at responsible and ethical design, okay? And lastly, I am sure most of you know that there is a new consultation out at the moment on what will be the new UK's GDPR. Okay, so there's a series of events that are happening, but there is also a consultation document here which anybody can take part in. So I'm involved kind of like weekly on these workshops, but the workshop we had the other week, which is quite interesting, which is all about Article 22. What shape should it be in for the GDPR, the new UK version? Should it change? Should it stay the same, or should it go? Okay, so there's a lot of debate around this. So anybody's got a voice, please take part in that consultation. So to end, I'm slightly over and I apologise. I am fighting for SMEs and small businesses because I think there's more investment needed nationally to upskill people. I'm not worried where in the UK, because I think it's for all UK or everybody, but I'm just really passionate about doing it in Manchester. By the way, I live in North Yorkshire, just so you know. I do believe that we need to get more focused on using ethics. So we need to upskill, and it's at every single level. So in our new MSc programs started this year, after Christmas, we're running modules specifically on AI on AI ethics, data management and governance. Citizen involvement is essential. The way I do it is go out and do public engagement, but I do go out as me. I'm Keeley. I'm not Professor Keeley Crockett. I'm just me, okay? And titles don't really mean anything, okay? In terms of, you just want to be there and hear what people have to say. And if we're going to implement this strategy, which clearly we are, then my end point is that we need the resource to be able to do it. And on that note, I am sorry I'm over by 3 minutes, but I will stop.
Keeley, that was fantastic. Have yourself a bit of a breath. Grab yourself a little drink. We do have some questions though, so your talking's not quite over yet.
Okay, I'm just gonna. I'll just unshare that.
No,
and
that's
then I'm ready. Yeah.
Cool. Right, so first of all, from my point of view, I want to say that was a fantastic talk, and one of the things I found really good about that was the fact that the link into the likes of the GDPR and obviously the overlap with Data Protection Act 2018 and such like, and one of the books that's just about to come out from the BCS on the 25th of November is all around data protection and compliance, and it does actually talk about artificial intelligence as part of that. So it's really good to see how all of those things do link up. I haven't quite finished the book yet, so I don't have all of the details yet, but it is really good to see how things link up. So cool on that one. Right, are you ready for your first question?
I'm scared now. I can't see the questions, you see, so I don't know what's coming.
No, that's fine. They're coming through a multitude of channels because obviously we've got a split between attendees and staff. Obviously, any attendees, please feel free to use the chat channel on your right-hand panel if you do have any questions that you wish to submit to Keeley. While our attendees do that, I will start with, do you think that the explainability of AI decision making will give rise to new advisor roles to help the public interpret and understand AI outcomes, somewhat in the same way as most members of the public require a lawyer or accountant to help them navigate complex spaces?
I think that's a fascinating question, and this is only my personal opinion, and I would say yes. We've been monitoring this kind of area. So two things we're seeing. The job role of a chief ethics officer has been popping up now in larger companies. So that's interesting. And secondly, in San Francisco, there's been a very, very successful startup that's rapidly grown in the last 6 months, which does just that. It offers advice to businesses on how to do AI ethics, and they do ethics audits and go in and check your AI and your models through to your processes, but they also offer advice as well to people, okay, which is very, very interesting. On my journey, I have found that through many interactions with people, and I'll give you one. Somebody I spoke to had gone online from a deprived area and wanted to apply for a payday loan. And this is not about judging payday loans. This was a single mother. She had 4 children. She had no money, and she wanted to buy her child something for their birthday. And she wanted £100, right? She ended up having to go for 200 because that's all they had. But she was actually rejected. She didn't know why. She couldn't ask any questions. She just felt, she said, I felt like everything had gone. I'd let my child down and everything. I couldn't ask why. So I said, well, if there was a number there or somebody to call, would you have asked why? So she said, no. She said, I left school. I didn't get any qualifications. I just looked stupid. And that was her perception of herself, right? Because she didn't understand. And I don't really want people to be like that. And I think the point that made by that question is really important. I do think there'll be advisor roles. I do think people in citizens advice will probably need to be upskilled. But if the public don't understand that they've got the right to ask, then we're not going to get there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, that's similar to obviously the way we are now with the GDPR and things like that. It's all around understanding what you're entitled to and things like that, and not being afraid to come forward and ask.
Yeah.
Cool. Right, next question is, are there any plans to gauge young people's understanding and acceptance of AI? And do you see AI becoming a core school subject in a similar way that coding has?
Oh my gosh, this is absolutely brilliant, right? So I am a STEM ambassador in the UK, and I have been teaching primary school children now for, I'd say, consistently on a weekly basis. Stuart, don't tell Darren, right? There we go. Coding, etc. But over the past few years, there's a few things I know. I know that the curriculum for computer science in primary school, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, was written in 2013. You may argue, why do primary school children need to know about AI? But there is a very, very important need to do so. So I've started developing some material on, say, neural networks, where I get them to build a brain using pipe cleaners to try and understand how an artificial neural network works. And we look at learning. How do we learn as children? How do we learn? How does an artificial computer do it? But there's also other elements of AI that we can drill down. So that's the first thing. AI at secondary school is within the curriculum. Okay, I don't think it's intense, but what is missing from those 2 areas is the ethics. We do a lot on cybersecurity and online safety, predominant, but I would like to see the ethical aspect of AI and the considerations of social impact be also included in that curriculum. Whew, sorry.
No, that's absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And obviously, like you mentioned there, cybersecurity, and obviously you've got the overlap with things like the ethical hacker and things like that. So it would make sense to go down a similar sort of trait with that.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I'm out of questions, but I do know that our lovely Martin has some more for you. So on that note, I'll go back on mute and hand over to Martin.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've just got a couple, and probably, I think just starting with, this is all well and good for the people who are doing it properly and who are doing their DPIAs and making sure that public records are there. But what about the bad guys that are using this for negative rationales? You know, how do we catch them? Because I know the ICO have obviously got powers to be able to investigate and do these things, but what would you recommend for people who think they might be subject to some, profiling that they've not consented to?
Well, I can actually tell you that anybody who suspects that can actually go and report directly to the ICO. And this is where businesses will get caught out, because those things need to be investigated. And this is the problem at the moment, right? So what we have is we've currently got this GDPR, right, that exists. It's not changed yet or anything like that. We have specific elements that relate to articles relating to AI and profiling, which is great, okay? So you go to the ICO and they can investigate under this. But if you look at the interpretation of that, it's all to do with case law. So there'll be cases where people have been profiled unethically. We probably know quite a few of them, but there'll be ones where there hasn't been sufficient proof and they haven't. So this is the problem at the moment. And this is what some of the lawyers I speak to say. It's all about case law and interpretation. But on the other side of that is, if a person is profiled, do they know to go to the ICO and make that complaint? Because I try and sell this to businesses that you need to have these processes in place, because it just takes one customer to have an experience, report to the ICO, you have an investigation, and that could be the end of your business. Maybe I'm
Absolutely.
too harsh there, but that's what I believe. Yeah.
No, that's what I would like to believe. And I think, yeah, I've worked in a few businesses where obviously, data is so important to all of their profiling and how they do it. But hoping that obviously as we mature and things become a little bit more, I suppose, understood and case law is more relevant, then hopefully they will start tightening up and people will start understanding it a little bit and there'll be less wiggle room.
Absolutely.
So one of the other ones as well, so I've got a couple more questions and I'm conscious of time. We've only got sort of 5 minutes left before the meeting's finished, but you talked about risk, and I suppose that one of the things is that it's really difficult to understand what a sort of 1 in 100,000 actually means. So especially when it comes to data and profiling and usage. So in terms of us as an industry and how we get that out there, what would you think we could do to address it?
So you probably gathered I answered every other question quick, and now I'm thinking about that. So, okay, so are you asking kind of what would be an acceptable risk?
Yeah, so I suppose how can people quantify that? How can they understand what that actually means to them?
Okay, so there's two questions, right? I must be honest, right? When I was speaking to people in the Turing Institute, so bearing in mind, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm speaking to people in there, we're having a good conversation. I kept asking the question that people had asked me, and this was 2 years ago. You keep talking about representative data, you keep talking about how much data you use, but how much data should you use? And again, they said, well, there's no answer to that. It's about the quality and quantity of the data. So we think about the risk, right? And I've been exploring this through some MSc projects, all right? So how much information do we give to a person to enable them to quantify the risk? Do we say, for example, that the amount of records used to build the model, bearing in mind they may not understand that, and we have to reword it, is this? Do we tell them, for example, I don't really want to use gender because I would question as a protected characteristic why you would use it in the first place. But in the loan example, would we tell them about male and females? Would we say that this is how the model had been created? And this survey I'm doing online has got 2 case studies in it. And one of them is something like this. And we tell them about it and we say, will you trust the model? It's made this decision. Do you think it's biased? And all these kinds of questions. And we've segmented that into people over 65. So what we've done is I've done hard copies. I've been out to people's homes who've expressed interest. I've done it on the phone. So it's inclusive to everybody. And it's so interesting what information you tell them with regards to the data, the classification accuracy, if it's classification problem, or the regression score, how they interpret that. It's very subjective, and it depends upon their experiences before. It may also depend upon whether they know anything about AI or they've never even heard of it in their lives. And the answer to your question is I don't have an answer. I don't know, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people information about their decision in different ways and different levels to different groups and populations of society. and seeing what they come back with. And they're telling us, well, we don't
that's
get
as good an answer as I could possibly have thought of, to be honest. In terms of, I realised it was probably one of those questions that probably raised more questions than it answered. But in terms of, I suppose, AI and people being profile, it seems to obviously understand what you do like, and then obviously serve up an awful lot of the same things. So one of the questions is that if it's learning what you like, and it's not necessarily a good thing if you like certain things like, say, extreme politics, how do we actually address that when people do change their minds? I mean, because I suppose it serves up what you've been looking at and not necessarily alters along with the behaviours.
I think you have to decide on a question about how often do you retrain your model on your data. Is it dynamic? Is it once a week? Is it once a day? Is it every time you come to, say, an Amazon website, you retrain based upon your past history? How often do we need to retrain to be able to capture the behaviours for that application in a timely manner? I think it's very, very difficult. I mean, how many times do... Okay, so I will just tell you, right? So I can go on Amazon and buy something, and then I do have a Facebook account. I go on there, and all of a sudden it's telling me I should buy more of these things, and I really, really hate it. But I'm doing some experiments with Facebook, so I have to do it.
Fair enough.
But I think one of the big questions when I've been working with SMEs is, they come onto the Foundry, for example, we build a prototype solution and a model with the data we have, but that's just the start of the journey. Yeah, you have to address those problems, how often you're going to rebuild it, and that's in relation to your customers and what you want to offer them. But I do agree, it's frustrating.
No, it absolutely can be. I once had a meeting with a few of the people from one of the large social media networks to look at some of the profiles they could offer for digital marketing, and quite frankly, it was pretty shocking as to how much they had, not only on the people that were subscribers or people on their network, but also to the people that had never even been on their platform. And I think that was probably the piece that shocked me the most, because a lot of these people were being targeted with advertising and those sorts of things, with lookalike audiences, even without ever subscribing to that network whatsoever. Now, this was a few years back, but again, I'm not convinced that that has fully gone away.
I agree with you completely, because again, people sign up to these platforms, and who actually reads the terms and conditions? And you particularly people, they're just going to tick and accept it, like taking a tablet out of a box. You accept it. People I think have become very complacent about the use of data.
They have, and also I think if people did understand it more, they could also occasionally use it to their advantage. Like you say, to get better deals on some of their shopping. Because you can certainly see, like you say, itself, Facebook, you can see a couple of days later, you'll start getting things. You can go and add something to your basket, come back a week later, and you'll have a coupon to get things a bit cheaper as well. So yeah, occasionally you can use it to your advantage. But,
yeah, no, absolutely. But again, it's how do we make sure citizens are empowered to be able to have the choice? So if they want to go and look at it, they can, they know where it is, and they know what their rights are. That's where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. And like you say, that is a lot of awareness. That's an awful lot of training, and your likes of citizens advice, etc., as you mentioned before, they're going to need a whole host of upskilling on these sorts of rights that people have got and consumers have got to be able to see things. But it's a very exciting time, actually. Fraught with danger, but very exciting.
No, it is definitely. And it's